Hello there. Welcome to the Star Wars Guys YouTube channel. I am Master Paul,
And I am Mando on fire.
and we're going to start a new series of stuff that we're going to be doing because we've done reviews on all of the Skywalker Saga movies as well as Rogue One and Solo. But me and Michael are also really big fans of video games. In fact, in the last live stream, Michael mentioned that he's going to be starting Twitch streaming, which you can follow at the same name as what you see on his screen here, Mando on Fire. And as we know, there has been a lot of Star Wars video games that has come out, and we'd like to review those also. So starting with this video, we're going to be doing that. In this video, we're going to be talking about one of the most recent Star Wars games to come out, Jedi Fallen Order. So make sure to hit like and subscribe, and wasting no more time, let's get into it. So my first question right off the bat, Michael, is as a whole, what are your thoughts on this game, just in general?
Well, if I had to compare it to anything, I would say I would compare it to The Force Unleashed in the way that it tells a story, just because I would say that not a large majority, but a large number of Star Wars video games are kind of spin offs. Like we had lightsaber duels from the Clone Wars, we had Lego Star Wars video games. So I do like this idea that it's telling a canonical story. Now, so far as like gameplay and how the story is told, I would say that it was very well done and does deal with the themes of pretty much who we are and what we've done in the past.
Yep, and I can agree with all that also. And of course, we're going to talk about all of that in more detail. So let's start off with the story. So this game, if I remember correctly, is set 5 years after the end of Revenge of the Sith. So Order 66 has happened, and the Empire is pretty much in full power of the galaxy, though there is some seeds of rebellion already sown, as we find out later in the game. And you play in this game as Cal Kestis, a Jedi Padawan on hiding on the scrapyard of Braca after he lost his master to Order 66, but he himself survived. And he eventually is outed as a Jedi, or he outs himself rather, when the Imperial Inquisitors are sent to Braca to find him, and they end up killing his friend. And thus, Cal is both on the run from the Empire, but he's also teamed up with these other characters named Ser, if I said that right, and Grease, and they are on a quest to locate a holocron that has a list of Force-sensitive children in an attempt to rebuild the Jedi Order. And so that's pretty much Cal's story there. And it takes him to different worlds like Zepho, which is a brand new world that we see. Um, Bogano, Dathomir, which was pretty cool to see that world come back from the Clone Wars. Same with Kashyyyk, both from I think the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith. And along the way, he meets some new faces and some familiar faces like Saw Gerrera. He pops up in this. But all the while, he's being chased by the second sister, who turns out to be a former Padawan herself named Trilla, who was the former Padawan of Ser, who is also a former Jedi, but gave up that life after Order 66 due to some, we'll say, poor choices on her part. So, all of that being said, I think this is a great story that's very well suited for a Star Wars game. I think Cal Kestis is a great protagonist to play as. He's very relatable, where at first he's just concerned about his own safety and keeping as low under the radar as possible. But as the series goes on and he sees that he has a purpose once again to find this holocron and also, take the fight to the Empire, he starts to come out of his shell a little bit more and more. And, excuse me, he realizes that he can't just hide, he has to actually do something. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I would agree with that just because there are a lot of callbacks to some of the original movies, not and some other her callbacks to the Clone Wars because spoiler alerts, when you go to Dathomir, you actually meet up with debatably one of the last Night Sisters named uh,
I think she was the last Night Sister.
yeah, I'm not particularly sure her if she was the last one, but her name was Marin, and she
Yes.
mentioned an armored foe wielding a lightsaber. And those of you who have watched the Clone Wars know exactly what that means.
Yep, that was General Grievous.
So I do like some of the callbacks that this game makes, and not just the story that it tells, but also some of the characters are very compelling, and they all deal with the same sort of grief. It seems like the choices or basic or pretty much their experiences in life have all affected them and pretty much how they live.
Yeah. And I like how again they were trying to go at the very end at least for the same sort of redemption story that they do in almost all the Star Wars movies where Cal at the end is trying to get Trilla to remember that she was once a Jedi and to get her to turn back to the light. And it looks like she wants to, but that opportunity, they put a twist in it where that opportunity is taken away from her with Darth Vader showing up. And this, by the way, Darth Vader at the end of this game is basically the Darth Vader we see in Rogue One. This is Darth Vader at his most scariest and most overpowered. So,
Hmm.
what do you think of that whole ending sequence?
Well, as some people may have tried over the internet, as kind of a brief aside, it, if you try to fight Vader or if he somehow catches you, you're gonna die. He's like one of those
Yeah,
unbeatable bosses that you intentionally have to run from. Now
exactly.
there are some. Now I will say that so far as like the gameplay sequences, on like how what Cal is somehow able to escape, it does seem a little bit too good to be true. Just because
Is that
on here,
Sam next to you?
yep, the dog is right here with me.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you think about it, uh, the whole idea of Vader throwing around platforms and then Cal using them as a means to escape seems a little far fetched, if we're being honest.
Right.
But other than that, I would say that the ending was pretty much just satisfying. And then we get to see just another tease of Seer falling to the dark side just a little bit as she's crushing the tube to pretty much contain Vader. And
Yes.
then and that Cal pretty much just says, "You still have a choice. Like you don't have to do this."
Yeah. And I suppose that's a good segue into talking about the supporting characters of this game. And we will
Hmm.
talk about Sarah because it's revealed in this game that ultimately the reason why she does not use the Force is because she was also captured by the Inquisitorius. And when she saw that Trilla had become an Inquisitor, she lost her mind. She turned in that moment to the dark side and lashed out against everyone in the room and was able to escape, but later on felt guilty about it and thus cut herself off from the Force until the very end. So I think for me, this was what they were trying to do with Luke in The Last Jedi, but here it works because I think it would make logical sense that a Jedi would feel guilty, of course, about turning to the dark side and not think that they're worthy to use the Force anymore or worthy to be a Jedi anymore. And so they choose to just live life as a civilian
Hmm.
until of course they feel the need to come back.
Hmm.
So that's why this we'll say story arc works for Seer, but doesn't work for Luke, at least in my opinion, because with Luke, he shut himself off from the Force and left himself on that island to die because he got premonitions, you might say, that Ben Solo might turn to the dark side, but we don't need to go into that any further. We've spoken about that enough already. My point is the idea that of a Jedi feeling guilty about their past and choosing not to use the Force. We've seen it before in Luke, but for me, it actually works with Sayre.
Hmm. Yeah.
And then the other characters, Grease, he's pretty much just the pilot for the show.
Yeah.
He really doesn't have much of a character arc, except we do learn that he was really big into the gambling scene, and
Hmm.
he knows where to go when Cal Kestis gets captured by the bounty hunters and put in that arena on that gambling planet.
Hmm.
And then the next character we'll talk about is Trilla, aka the second sister. And I think she is one of the most tragic characters in all of Star Wars. Not the most tragic character by far, but one of them, because again, she had that opportunity right there in front of her at the very end of the game to come back to the light and forgive Sayre. But again, that opportunity was taken away from her when Darth Vader showed up. And of
Hmm.
course, seeing the whole process of how she turned to the dark side was just really, really heart wrenching. What do
Hmm.
you think?
Well, I do think that for Trilla turning to the dark side, it definitely feels one of the most human ways she would do it. She did it because of how she was tortured and how she was betrayed by Sayre, and how she pretty much just, or
I
at
wouldn't
least,
necessarily I wouldn't necessarily say that she was betrayed by Sarah. I think that was the lie that she convinced herself of.
yeah, yeah. But basically, what happened is that Sayre basically gave up Trilla while they were interrogating Sayre on her location in the different Padawans.
Hmm.
But it's a for her to feel betrayed by her master, this person that she's only known for probably all her life, to suddenly just give her up is one of the most human ways someone would turn evil and be untrustworthy.
Right. And then once they learned the truth of the situation, that the person that they thought betrayed them still cared for them and was ultimately acting in their best interest, that'll make them, of course, realize that they were in the wrong the whole time. And as I said, there's your chance for forgiveness and redemption there, but it's taken away from you. Unlike when,
Hmm.
Vader was given the same chance at redemption and was able to take it.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the most interesting characters but also the one that we kind of see the least out of the main characters is Marin. And as you kind of mentioned before, she's one of, if not the last Night Sister left in existence after the big separatist massacre on Dathomir.
Hmm.
And I like the story arc that they went with her, where she starts out very, very untrusting of Cal Kestis and the Jedi as a whole, blaming the Jedi for the the Night Sister's demise. But then as she realizes exactly who Malachos, who that's another character we'll talk about, once she realizes Malachos's true intentions of just seeking power for the sake of power, not really caring about her, then she realizes that perhaps it's wrong to just stay angry at the Jedi, and it's time for a change in her life, hence why she ends up leaving Dathomir with Cal Kestis.
Hmm.
So what do you think about this character?
Well, I do think that kind of like how I said with Trilla, her starting off as like not really liking the Jedi, he is very human in the sense that even though that clearly the Night Sisters had it coming so far as like their massacre because of a whole complicated subplot of how Ventress wanted revenge on Dooku, and in order to do that, they created Savage Press, and then Savage Press realized he was used, and it just becomes like a whole mess. But
Yep.
the root problem and the root cause of the problem was the Night Sisters. So even though that they clearly had it coming, It
Yeah,
does.
they were no saints, but for sure.
Yeah. At the time, he and Marin pretty much knew nothing else other than the Night Sisters because pretty much they were her family.
Right.
And I think it also shows pretty much how much of a simple view of the Jedi some people can have just because there's a literally she thought that Grievous was a Jedi just because he had a lightsaber. But then Cal
Exactly.
says that just because you have a lightsaber doesn't mean you are a Jedi or something like that.
That's right. And then, as I mentioned before, another character that's pretty interesting, but you don't really see that much of, is Taran Malachos, and this is one of the bosses that you end up fighting in the game. So Taran Malachos was another Order 66 survivor who ended up on Dathomir, but I'm guessing in the trauma of seeing what happened with Order 66, he turned to the dark side and realized that the Jedi had fell long before the purge, which is not entirely wrong. The Jedi certainly were stifled by tradition instead of
Mhm.
following the will of the Force, but he basically lost hope in his own people and thought that it was best that they stayed dead and outright rejected the possibility that they could come back and be something better than what they were, which is, of course, why he ended up fighting Cal Kestis.
Mhm.
So, what do you think of Taran Malachos?
I want to say it pretty much serves the purpose as being our anti-Cal, if that makes any sort of sense.
Yeah,
Just because, for me, I like how they kind of set him up as a stranger, but even though that it was pretty obvious that his role was going to be bigger just because he was literally just a guy in a black cloak.
right.
I do like that they set him up in such a way where we knew that he was going to be like some sort of dark side user, but it didn't stop there.
Right. And I think that's it as far as the characters go. So let's transition to talking about the gameplay. Now, the
Mhm.
gameplay for me, as much as I love the story of this game, the gameplay for me is ultimately what seals the deal for me. I've said before that I think this is one of the best single player lightsaber focused Star Wars games out there. And the biggest reason why I say that is because of the gameplay, specifically the combat gameplay, because the combat gameplay, it's so easy yet so satisfying to pick up, because it's not like what was in Star Wars Battlefront, the 2015 version, where the Jedi are literally just doing left to right swipes. No, it's actual moves that Cal is pulling off.
Mhm.
And especially once he gets the double bladed lightsaber later in the game, it's just a couple buttons that you're hitting, but at the same time, seeing the stuff that he's doing on screen just makes it all the more satisfying.
Mhm.
But at the same time, the enemies themselves are pretty challenging. Yeah, sure, your stormtrooper, you can block blaster bolts back at them and hit them, and down them in one hit or one deflected shot. But there's also tougher enemies out there. For example, every single planet has some form of wildlife you have to watch out for that can really put a hurting on you if you're not careful. There are I forget what their official name is, but I'm going to call them the K2SO droids. Those are pretty fun to fight. So are the Purge troopers, and the boss battles are always amazing, especially boss battles against human combatants. So this is the second sister, the ninth sister, and Taran Malachos. All of
Mhm.
those were amazing fights that honestly you could see. It's almost like you're watching a Star Wars movie with those fights. You're watching a cinematic lightsaber fight right there, but you're actually in control of one of the characters, and that's like one of the best parts of the game for me.
Mhm.
So what would you say, Michael, about the combat in this game?
I like the simplicity of it. Now there are some some things that do get a little bit complicated, such as like different combos that you can do. And I do like
Right.
that there's certain combos that you have to use the force with, as opposed to like just pressing the X button or the square button, depending on if you're playing Xbox or PlayStation.
Right.
And let's see, so far as like the enemy movements, I want to say that just as a quick PSA, the stormtroopers can actually aim this time. Like, I'm not even
Yeah,
joking. They can aim even if they're having one of those heavy miniguns.
that
And
is
I like that
true.
there's different variations of each enemy. Now we
Yeah.
talked about the wildlife, and that remains pretty consistent. Like, you just fight like a spider, maybe some wolf thing, or maybe like a crocodile thing on Bogano. But each enemy class pretty much has their own, pretty much, they pretty much have their own ranks. Where the pretty much the single lowest rank could be like a stormtrooper, for example, and then the highest
Yeah.
rank could be purge trooper,
Yeah.
which I could honestly talk about the purge troopers for a while because this is actually, in my opinion, the second time that we've seen some iteration of the purge troopers in video games because there was another one before this from the Force Unleashed, but they were just glorified battle droids,
Yeah. Wait,
which I
you're not talking about the Magnet Guards, are you?
no, these were like,
Okay.
think of it as almost like blue C3PO bodies, but this time they're obviously bigger and they have like a minigun turret over their shoulders, kind of like War Machine does,
Yeah, I
and
can.
they pretty much have like an Imperial mask on.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've played those games, so I'll have to check them out. They're definitely on the list, by the way,
Yeah,
of things that we're going to review are those games.
yeah. But basically, the fact that they make the purge troopers human and able to pretty much stand in their ground up against a Jedi is pretty impressive. Like, I'll
Yeah.
take like hats off to Respawn for making them better than the ones from the Force Unleashed.
Yes, for sure. Now, speaking of gameplay as far as the rest of the game is concerned, when you're not fighting enemies, this is very much a dungeon crawler Tomb Raider sort of game where you're crawling through these big elaborate dungeons on all these different planets, and you're traversing these great lengths using all your Jedi abilities that you learn. And it's really cool, but at the same time, from if you're thinking about this in a realistic perspective, there was one YouTuber, the Act Man, that pointed this out. As cool as it is to do some of the stuff you do, such as run along walls, you got to wonder, in a realistic setting, would these places be designed where that sort of thing is possible? Like, for example, there's so many places in this game where you slide down a place.
Mm-hmm.
How does that happen naturally and not using the excuse of gameplay?
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
but that's probably like my one minor nitpick about this game is, or one of very few minor nitpicks I have about this game is that, sure, it's basically gameplay over realism, but again, it's not that big of a deal for me. That, and a lot of the chests that you find around the world, with the exception of the stim pack chest, that actually does help you, but all the cosmetic stuff, it's there's no point to it unless it gives some form of some sort of edge to you. Like, for example, in this game you can customize your lightsaber, and it would be cool that each part of the lightsaber that you can customize did something to the lightsaber. For example, if you changed the switch section, perhaps your lightsaber now does more damage. Or say you change the emitter and your lightsaber glows brighter in the dark. Just something like that. But again, those are my only problems I have with the game. Is there anything negative that you can say about the game, Michael?
Well, in regards to the Tomb Raider stuff that we talked about, it does get a little bit repetitive in some cases,
Yeah,
but I do believe that's pretty much what they wanted. Not necessarily the repetitiveness, but basically a somewhat open world area where you have to climb up these vines or walls or just whatever. And here's
right.
one thing I do like about them, kind of transitioning away from the nitpicks, is the fact that sometimes when you're climbing one of these things, you get just a brief little cinematic and you get to see a lot of landscape.
Yes, yes, and that's a good point also that I forgot to mention. And I think that's kind of the point that we'll close on is the sound and visual design of this game, because this
Hmm.
game, especially on current gen, looks absolutely gorgeous. It not only does it look gorgeous with all of the big cinematics that you see, as Michael said, that while you're climbing, say you're climbing up a rope on Braca, and you see just this, and the camera pans out, and you see just this big shot of all of these scrapped Republic Star Destroyers and
Hmm.
other ships that are coming down to the surface to get scrapped. Or you're climbing up a vine on Kashyyyk, and you see the giant ceremonial ancient tree in the
Hmm.
foreground as the camera zooms out, and so on and so forth. And not only that, but the sound design also and the music score are all really, really good. Um, and another thing, going a little bit back into the gameplay, I know we've mentioned Tomb Raider as a comparison, but I think the biggest comparison that people say about this game is that it plays like a Dark Souls game. Now, admittedly, neither of us have ever played Dark Souls, so we don't know if that comparison is true. But given what I have been told, at least about Dark Souls, is that basically, if you're playing on a difficult enough setting, any enemy realistically could kill you at any time. And playing it on some of the harder difficulties, I can 100% agree with that. Like I'll hold my hand up and admit now, I've never beaten this game on anything harder than story mode, which is the easiest difficulty. What about you?
Um, I want to say I've tried Jedi Knight, and then I was gonna do Jedi Master, but I never really got to it because there's some other games I was interested in playing.
Yeah. So maybe as we said, Michael's going to get into Twitch streaming. Maybe we'll try this game on the harder difficulties and see what happens. But for now, those are our thoughts on Jedi Fallen Order. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Be sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thank you very much.